Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the session. My name is Munir. I am a senior tax lecturer at the University of Johannesburg. Don't ask me how come I'm here. My boss asked me to be here, so I'm here. And obviously, I do have an acute and a keen interest still in auditing and what has happened, having previously worked at SAICA. So just to deal with some of the administrative matters. So firstly, to remind all those in audience here to please switch your phones onto silent right at this stage, and also keep it for the duration of the event itself. And then secondly, just the gents and ladies. So gents, if you step out of the venue and turn toward the right, you'll find your place quite easy. And to the ladies on the left. So, you know, this issue of toilets come up all the time. So the other day, I was at a restaurant, and here I am making my way towards the gents. And here's this gentleman, and he's walking quite a panic, quite a rush. I would call, or accountants would call it, just-in-time arrival. So he seemed to be just coming in time. And as you know, nowadays at the restaurants, they don't have clearly demarcated areas like we do at the university. We're quite organized, we're quite flex over here, where we mark it, ladies, gents. You get nowadays pictures. Did you see this? So you arrive here and you get this guy is arriving at the toilet just in time, and there's a picture of a hen, and the other side is a picture of a chicken. So he's sort of in the stuck, and he's like, which way to go? And he looks at me. Fortunately, I knew where to go, so I sorted myself out. So thank God for the university still sticking to sanity and having those issues sorted out. Okay, so without further ado, if I can also ask those in the audience, because it's been live streamed, if I can ask you to please come down to ensure we all can be seen as well. If you can move forward as well, that will be appreciated. And then without further ado, I'd like to introduce our Executive Dean, Prof. Daniel van Lille. He's going to do the official welcome on behalf of the university then. Prof. Daniel.
You know, somehow this feels like the first week in a first-year class where you invite everybody to the front to be part of the conversation. So, dear guests, it's absolutely wonderful to have you all tonight here at the University of Johannesburg, and more specifically at this wonderful, wonderful occasion where opinion and wisdom are equally shared. And Vassi, especially tonight, a special, special, warm, huge welcome to you. It is absolutely great to have you here. But why do I say this to the chairperson of a major bank group? Guess which bank? So I think there are three things for us that are really important. All of them has got to do with the difference between a CV and an authentic CV. It's something that I really spend time on distinguishing, and because you'd like to know who's the person behind all of this. And that for me is the authentic CV. And I think the first part that I always look for is inspiration. And a key thing for us, Vassi, is who would we like to expose our students to? Who would we like to talk to our students often and share a wealth of wisdom and understanding of what's happening and how the big picture fits together? And the second one would be one of the UJ values, ethical foundation. And I think this is why the topic tonight is so appropriate. And then finally, I think there's right through all of this, whether you debate the impact of the fourth industrial revolution, the latest phone, the very mini budget speech, or whatever the case might be, I think there's always at the core of this, how do we improve humanity? How do we serve our society best? And those three elements kind of triangulate for me into an authentic CV. So here's a story, and let's test our honored guest tonight against that. I've always admired you from a distance, and recently we met for an early morning breakfast. And Prof. Ben and I have arrived around about 15-20 minutes earlier in heat of traffic and all the others, because we don't want to be late. And then he was already there, and he said, let's have a coffee while waiting for the other attendees. Vassi, what a lovely conversation. And I really felt that morning in what we have discussed, every element that we have covered and made decisions on in a matter of 12 minutes reflected the 3 points that I signaled out. And therefore, it is our absolute pleasure to say welcome here tonight, and be looking forward to working with you, and especially as a professor of practice within the School of Accounting. We are so dependent on collaboration in making this and working together. Collaboration is a bit of an outdated word for me, to get things to where they should be. And we would like to walk with you side by side. Thank you and welcome, and to all of you.
Thank you very much. You know, I seem to say this every time I speak, but my dad always said to me, if you're ahead of the game, you must stop. Maybe I shouldn't just say anything more, Daniel, with that introduction. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And firstly, let me thank you from the university, particularly my dear friend, Prof. Ben Marks. And our relationship goes back, 30 years at least. And also welcome you all here this afternoon. I'm sorry if some of you have had to travel a long way or brace the traffic to come and listen to an old retired man like me, but thank you for giving me the opportunity. I also wanted to acknowledge the Executive Dean, Prof. Daniel. Thank you for your kind words once again, much appreciated. And also to Nolwazi Nomorara, if she's here. Right, I want to talk to you about this topic today, which is effectively ethics. And let me start off by saying that it's two simple questions. Can I do it? And invariably that's an easy answer, yes or no. But the more difficult part is, should I do it? And for me, that's what ethics is all about. So if you listen to nothing else I say in the next 35 or 40 minutes, just reflect on those two questions whenever you are sitting and dealing with an ethical dilemma in whatever you do. So by way of context then, let me try to kind of picture the scene in terms of how we find ourselves here in little old South Africa. And if we look at the revelations that we've seen in terms of the behaviors of some of our leaders in this country, be they in public institutions, government, be they in private institutions, or in institutions that were previously lauded as standing above the rest and are the guardians of independence and good governance. And even what's happening in some institutions that should be living these values of integrity. We certainly see a lot of anger when we see these highlights on TV or in the newspaper articles, and I certainly am reeling at the moment, having spent the best part of 12 years in the UK, working in the global organization of Deloitte, and coming back to South Africa now for 4 years, and seeing all the stuff that unravels around me makes me really angry. We've also seen in the recent past an escalation of prominent leaders failing to make ethical choices and decisions, answering that question, can I do this, should I do it? The behavior has significantly, I must say, eroded the confidence in South Africa Inc. And you all know or would have read that we have a big conference here on Friday where President Ramaphosa is trying to engender trust and recreate the interest in South Africa. But I have to say our behaviors have certainly undermined and eroded the confidence in South Africa Inc. And at a time when we need it most, particularly around this investment conference. We could go on and say, I would say we have a crisis of confidence in South Africa at the moment. Now just look at these headlines. And I was pleased enough to see this morning's most recent one in the paper, that one. Gartner, a global organization, admitting to having extracted 200 million for a pointless exercise. And as I speak, you can just reflect on that, on those headlines, and some of them will all be familiar to you, and we can probably cover some of them in the questions time. So this crisis of confidence in the soundness of governance in South Africa has certainly undermined the investment case for the country, and indeed many of the businesses and companies that operate within our business world. The correlation between investment and sound governance is very straightforward in my view. You cannot have one without the other. There's almost a bilateral relationship. And without substantial new investment in our economy in our country, we will not achieve the inclusive growth that the President talks about. That's much needed to address the country's three most important challenges, and I call them the ugly triplets, which is unemployment, poverty, and inequality. So, what's happened to South Africa? And just let's reflect on a few things that you will see on the slide, and I'll take them one by one. The IMD World Competitive Ranking places South Africa today at number 53 of 63 countries that they assess. Now, this index analyzes how an economy manages the totality of its resources and the completeness and its competitiveness to increase the prosperity of its population. 63 countries, we land at number 53. To give you some perspective, in 1997, this same survey rated South Africa as number 42. So we've lost 13 places. This shows that there is, unfortunately, a cost to unethical behavior, whichever way you look at it. If you look at the Competitiveness Index and what this says. And now this one is particularly close to my heart, having led a large accounting firm in this country and being a chartered accountant myself. South Africa fell from the number one position when this rating came out some 9 or 10 years ago, and we held the position of number one for 7 consecutive years. And because of all the headlines you've seen and some of the behaviors of our leaders in South Africa, we are now number 30. Not a nice place to be for us in South Africa. According to the Bureau of Economic Research paper, titled 10 Years After Lehman Brothers, SA's post-crisis performance has to be put into some perspective. And what this paper says is the South African economy that we have today could have been 30% better than it is today, or that actually translates into almost 1 trillion rand larger as an economy, and we would have created 2.5 million jobs had we kept to the pace that we were keeping to post our democracy in 1994. The government could also have collected some 1 trillion rand in more taxes, and the economy would have performed closer to that of its peers if these taxes were collected and deployed appropriately in the services that we should have deployed them on. Now that actually says it. And I'm going to leave this slide on for the rest of my talk, just so that you can reflect on where I'm going in these presentations. Now these numbers, you will agree with me, are staggering, but they also don't include the cost of maladministration, corruption, and policy missteps that have been taken in the last 10 years, certainly when we've had our President Zuma in power. And this is estimated to run into tens of billions of rand, that the report goes on to say. The country's lackluster performance was driven by a range of complex internal and external factors, not just by leadership, I have to add. We are familiar with the external factors, including the sluggish growth and the falling commodity prices, and indeed the geopolitical situation that we currently find ourselves in. But these don't fully account for the full extent of South Africa's underperformance. While domestic factors, and you'll relate with this, particularly policy uncertainty, mismanagement of the state, which I've referred to earlier, and particularly the state-owned enterprises, and the following business and domestic confidence and trust, all weighed heavily on the domestic economic activity. But the behavior of corporate leaders, in my view, has certainly had a critical role to play in destroying this confidence and trust that I spoke about earlier. This also highlights some of the substantial losses that impact countries with irregular, unsound, and corrupt practices and policies, not just South Africa. It not only drives up cost and it not only drives up cost, it also drives down productivity and by definition competitiveness in the global economy. But the key thing that is an outcome of all of this stuff is the inability of government to deliver the so desperate services we are needed to provide for the basic human rights of our citizens in this country. And more importantly, from a business perspective, it has an impact on government's inability to provide the environment for businesses to grow and create the jobs. Because bear in mind, it's businesses that creates jobs, not government. Government's responsibility is to provide the infrastructure so businesses can flourish and indeed create the jobs that we so desperately need. An organization might find itself impossible to recover from the lack of stakeholder trust linked to dishonesty. And this is an important point. And according to Prof. Dion Rousseau, who is the CEO of the Ethics Institute, says that dishonest conduct can also render a business more liable to continued scrutiny by regulators and other stakeholders. And we've seen this in the various inquiries on state-owned capture, the inquiry into PIC, the inquiry into SARS, all coming to bear. And that's the key point that Dion makes. In fact, what it does do, it increases scrutiny and might even bring to the forefront the unethical behavior of leaders, which we've certainly seen in these inquiries. In addition to the significant costs associated with unethical behavior, of decreased productivity and decreased performance levels of employees, amongst others, are significant other risks. One is of public trust, and how this public trust is lost in the long term, which has a significant impact on the profitability of entities and ultimately the stability and inevitably the ability of the company to continue to increase value in whatever trade it chooses to operate. The problem with reflecting on all of the stuff that I've just done is to focus on the negative consequences of unethical behavior and doesn't really help us go forward, probably makes us more angry. So let me try and kind of move us a little bit away from the context. While reflecting on where we are is critically important and necessary, I believe we need to continue to focus on the training, be they current and future training of our future leaders, in order to understand what ethical, authentic, and admirable leadership looks like when it is working. Let me repeat that. Ethical, authentic, and admirable leadership when it is working. And here I'm not talking about the charismatic leaders you would have read about in the Steinhoff debacle. Okay? We need to be highlighting to the broader society role that these future leaders should play. And you really pose three questions here. What is worth learning and emulating from these inspirational leaders? What are the positive trends and behaviors that these leaders are using to drive and inspire their people in their organizations? And what does the positive future of ethical leadership look like? Just reflect on those three questions. And as you're doing that, think about this. And some of you, certainly you folk, are too young to kind of resonate with what I will say to you. But for us older folk in here, 20, 30 years ago, a bank manager, because I'm now a banker, in the town that you lived in, or the community that the bank had a branch in, had a certain moral and ethical status in the organization. He was basically the kingpin, or she. I don't think there were many female bank managers in those days either. And these individuals were the most trustworthy people around the world. These were people and communities went to when they needed assistance and looking at social upward mobility and all that stuff. Think also about the role of the accountant as that has changed. A chartered accountant had a similar status, and I can say this, coming from a rural farm community in Chatsworth, from the Indian community, and I think I was probably one of the first chartered accountants in my community. And certainly when I told people I was a chartered accountant, you were like put on a pedestal. And I can't say that we can say the same for the chartered accountancy profession today. Having said that, I don't want to discourage you to become chartered accountants. I believe we can and we will reclaim those positions as chartered accountants, and I hope you will get that feeling by the time I finish this talk. We don't look at individuals and ask them, what is their moral and ethical compass? We used to assume by your standing and what you did in the community. Instead, what we used to do in the past, we used to rely on the laws and regulations that govern these people, be they doctors, lawyers, accountants, branch managers, bankers, whatever. And we relied on the applications of these laws and regulations to lead to good outcomes. And we never really focused on the behavior of these individuals and what they did going forward. Of course, don't misunderstand me. We do need laws and regulations, and indeed the enforcement and appropriate enforcement of these laws and regulations. But we also need to go back to the basics. We need people in our societies to be honest citizens, and we need to be able to judge their character. And I think this is a critical shift in the ethical debate. Some of this might sound a bit theoretical to you, but if we want to return to a focus on people's character, it has a real practical consequence for us in the current paradigm. Again, the Ethics Institute says, it is naive to assume that people are either ethical or they are not, but there's much one can do in order to get this bench line. The Ethics Institute goes on to say that ethics cannot manage itself, but it can be managed. Fortunately, many organizations across the globe, and indeed here in South Africa, and I'm sure the University of Johannesburg, are cognizant of this view and follow international and national leading practices and guidelines to enable them to manage ethics in a concerted and structured manner. Every organization will have an ethics statement. I'm sure you at UJ have that as well. We always talk about, and this is quite an important point in terms of the shift I'm asking, we also talk about leaving a better planet for our children. How often have you heard that? But I think we've forgotten about thinking about leaving better children for our planet. And the better children here are the future leaders. I say this jokingly, but I think it's an important point for us to ponder over as we think about this ethical dilemma. Can I, should I? Right or wrong, good or bad, the first point of ethics is taught at home, our parents. That's where ethical behavior starts. And I have a story about that later as well. And I believe that this ethical journey should be reinforced throughout the learning career of individuals, be they in primary education or tertiary education, and indeed complemented and supplemented by our places of worship and our religious beliefs, whatever they might be. As far as I'm aware, most tertiary education faculties, having come through the accounting faculty, have ethics as a key component of the curriculum. And I'm sure you've been taken through that in your auditing curriculum. But not only for auditors. You have this virtually in every discipline that you choose to study, be it engineering, medicine, legal. Ethics is a key part of the tertiary education that goes through. So while I believe we do have the frameworks already in place, why then do we find ourselves where we are in what I believe feels like a huge ethical deficit in South Africa, if you reflect on those, the first slide I showed you. And here again, the three questions to ponder. Are we teaching the rules? And are we utilizing practical case studies that work through what is the right thing to do? Are we just glibly going through rote learning when we are teaching these ethics as part of the curriculum? Are we debating the more fundamental issues? Are we having the philosophical questions answered from an ethics point of view? And are we driving the ethical character of these kids that we teach as we take them through these curriculums? Or are we relying too much on the regulation and laws to produce the right outcome? And the third question to ponder over is, where and how are we defining what a person's good character actually means? Is that part of the curriculum? Does the willingness to act in the best interest of others, an understanding of justice and fairness, empathy for others, the examples that we are teaching these young kids at university, that should shape the character of these individuals and indeed their behaviors as they embark on their careers after they leave academia? I know very well this is not an easy fix, and specifically within the South African context. And this is the story I was relating to that I said I would come to earlier. And let me just put some context to this. I used to run Deloitte some 20-odd years ago as the country managing partner. And this was in about 1996, 1998, when we were going through a huge transformational phase of the firm, where we were predominantly white male to becoming a multicultural firm, is what we called it in those days. And part of the stuff that the psychologists and the people that were helping us with this change asked me to do as a CEO is to go around the firm and have focus group conversations around ethics, around honesty, around behaviors, around business etiquette. So we could have people of diverse backgrounds, including females in those days, who were never in the accounting profession, how we might embrace them and bring them into the firm and provide them a fair shot of succeeding by creating this environment. And I remember very distinctly this individual is a partner in the firm today. And we were talking about ethics and honesty. And we were having our own little debate in our cocoon from our background, our learning. And we were talking to about 10 or 12 people in the group that were black people from a rural background. And the one person had the courage, I wouldn't embarrass him by naming, but he's a partner in Deloitte today. He put up his hand and he said, you know, you talk about all this honesty, you talk about ethics. If my mother, who was a domestic worker, didn't bring stuff for us from the master's house, I wouldn't be sitting here today. So in his dilemma and his frame of mind, taking stuff from the master's house was an acceptable behavior, and that's how they grew up. And here I am as a CEO of Deloitte sitting in this audience trying to talk to them about ethics and behaviors. You completely lose the audience. And I think that's a critical thing that we need to do, and hopefully this example brings it out, is how sometimes we talk completely past the audience in terms of driving this ethical behavior and this challenge to our people as we drive this forward. And we should force ourselves to think in terms of where is that person you're speaking to and engaging with coming from as we have these ethical dilemmas going forward. So for me, that was a very, very, very good learning point. And as a consequence of that, we made a whole lot of changes in terms of how we drove transformation in the firm and how we drove ethical behavior and how we brought to life what you guys as lecturers taught these students before they came to the firm. And for me, it was a fundamental shift. Now, organizations have a fundamental responsibility to ensure that the frameworks that you taught at university are reinforced within the organizations and applied rigorously as you work in these organizations and see these ethical standards and statements come to life, not just written on paper. And I'll talk a bit about this as well, how you convert these statements and policies and ethical standards into behaviors. And one of the areas where entrants would experience in organizations is going back and looking at the hiring credentials in organizations. Because so often people take these competencies for granted because they would have come from University of Johannesburg, and essentially you have the ability and the academic ability to do what you do. But I think more and more, as we find ourselves where we are in South Africa and as we go forward as a country, we need to actually bring into that selection process the characters and the behavioral profiles of the individuals that we choose to employ in our organizations. And I'll talk a little bit about what we do at Nedbank, and Z, you can probably keep me honest here. And just by way of background, I'll try to use Nedbank as a case study as I articulate this going forward. So we at Nedbank, we believe we play a critical role in society in being entrusted with and securing almost 25% of the nation's saving. So we see ourselves broader than just a bank. We see ourselves as an integral and critical part to society. And this is a responsibility that we as a bank do not take lightly, and certainly I as chairman do not take lightly. If we falter in this responsibility, not only will we lose our license to operate, but we will lose our banking license. But most importantly, I believe, as Nedbank, we will lose our social license to operate. And we would lose this burden of public trust that's entrusted upon us by the savings that the people put into the bank. So having the appropriate level of governance within Nedbank and the mechanism and pillars to support the ethical behaviors of our people becomes the forefront of the way we conduct our business at Nedbank. So it is therefore important that our staff are put through this appropriate rigor through examples, and I'll use the example that Z drives in Nedbank, the accredited CA training program. Our employees, especially the CA trainees, are required continuously to display professionalism, ethical behavior as Nedbank trainees, because they are going to be placed in positions of trust, managing client relationships and transactions, and therefore it's very important for them to be able to identify opportunities that could give rise to questionable professional behaviors around themselves. And this is strengthened by the various programs that we have within the bank to ensure that real-life case examples are taught to these individuals as they join the bank. As I see it, therefore, using Nedbank as a case study as an example, it is critically important that institutions and organizations, be they schools, places of worship, tertiary curriculum, and work environment places, needs to be the enforcers and upholders of high ethical standards and behaviors. Whilst this is important, the imperative, a significant imperative, rests with us as members of the board, and particularly with just us as chairman, because we are the persons that drive the tone at the top of these organizations. And it's pivotal for us to lead by example as we do this and make sure that we walk the talk and drive the right behaviors. This responsibility doesn't only rest on the chairman of the organizations, but I think it also rests on our CEOs. It rests on the individuals we employ, and to a large extent it rests on the clients that we serve. And all of us have to hold ourselves accountable to this code of behavior if we're going to move forward. I think for business, we need to move away from corporate social responsibility. While I think that's important, I think a lot of that's become ticking the box, and in my mind, it's a kind of stable takes to go to the game, to be invited to the party. And I think we need to move more towards corporate citizenry. And we've heard politicians now embrace this notion of corporate citizenry a lot more. And we've seen President Ramaphosa also call all of us as citizens a call to action in becoming citizenries, good corporate citizenry. And again, using Nedbank as an example, and I'm not sure how many of you are aware of this, but we continue to play a leading role in the proactive engagement that you would have seen between government, labor, and the private sector through the CEO initiative that has been so often spoke about. And Nedbank, I'm proud to say, has been one of the founding members that has driven this initiative in South Africa. And the stuff that we've been talking about with government, labor, and big business also rests around the three ugly triplets I spoke about: poverty alleviation, job creation, and unemployment. Internally at Nedbank, our CEO, Mike Brown, you would have seen him on TV and talk a lot about this. But what we did at Nedbank is we made sure Mike Brown ran a internal communication program within Nedbank so that the staff were able to hear and to understand what we as Nedbank were doing as part of the CEO initiative in order to drive themselves as individuals to be a part of the discussion, be a part of the debate, and more importantly for them to take individual responsibility and actions in terms of what they could do to become a good corporate citizen as part of this drive. But I think what's important is, while the CEO initiative is important, it can't just rest on corporate South Africa. We all need to do and review the social compact that we have with each other as we work, as we have with our customers, as we have with the people we interact with outside of our workplace, our social partners, in terms of driving this debate and talking and thinking about what corporate citizens is all about. We as individuals in South Africa, and I think this has been fundamentally a problem as to why we've got to where we've got to, we need to become more socially conscious, and we need to become more socially cohesive as a population, and we can only do that if we take that personal step, be you male, female, white, yellow, black, or brown. And I think that's a call of action. How do you take that personal step? We should ensure that there are positive influences in our place of work, and we need to make sure that as we do our work, we don't only do the job, but we think about the public and societal impact of whatever jobs we are doing. I'm acutely aware that this brings an increased responsibility that we have to charge ourselves with as business and employees within businesses. But I believe if we as South Africa to go forward, we need to actually do this in a much more aggressive way, because it's going to impact all our lives here in South Africa. I'm also proud to play a leading role in Nedbank and making sure that Nedbank continues to support the economy by enhancing governance. Through the CEO initiative, there are a number of initiatives that are underway, and I'll just mention a couple. The YES program, which Danielle, you and I spoke about, this notion of trying to create 1 million jobs over the next 3 years, that we as businesses committed to President Ramaphosa, and how do we as business get involved together with the universities, the supply of this talent, how do we embrace them within our organizations, and how do we make sure that we get these 300,000 kids a year that come into the workforce, get ready for doing some meaningful work going forward. And I think that now's the time for the partnering, and I hope together with the other universities, the University of Johannesburg would lead in this and hopefully choose Nedbank as your partners to do this as well. We think that job creation is very important, and that's another reason we've contributed as Nedbank already into this 1.5 billion SME fund, because I think in South Africa we need to create a culture of it's okay to run a business, it's okay to own a bakkie or a white van and become a plumber and an electrician. You don't necessarily just have to look at office work. And the key drivers in the UK, having lived there for 12 years myself, is the key drivers of the economy there are the guys with the man in the vans. And we need to rekindle that culture and recreate that as an acceptable career for our young folk coming out of universities. Because these are the people that are going to create the jobs. You might start off with just yourself, but within a short space of time you'll be employing 3 to 5 people. And we're very pleased that we were able to contribute to that as well. Another 2 key debates that Nedbank's been involved in, just by way of describing what corporate citizenry is all about. I think, and I don't want to sound boastful here, but Nedbank was the first bank out to engage in the debate on land reform, expropriation without compensation. We provided our submission, and we asked to present to the Commission, and we articulated a bank's view why it's important to have the debate, having taken account of our past, but we came to the conclusion as Nedbank that there was no need to amend the Constitution, and we put the Nedbank point of view out there as certainly a point of view, and the debate should be had. That's, I think, another good example. So another key role I think that that Nedbank plays is driving a purpose statement. One of the first things I did when I came to Nedbank was ask the CEO, what was the purpose of Nedbank? What's our purpose? And I'm a big believer in having purpose-led organizations that are values-driven. Okay? So for us as Nedbank, we say we use our financial expertise to do good. Being a bank is what we do. Our purpose is to use our financial expertise to do good. And a key part of doing good is driving responsible behavior and ethical behavior based on trusted relationships with our stakeholders. I do, however, believe that you need more than just purpose-led organization. You need boards that think about how they can make their governance structure more responsive to the environment that within we're working. Not just ticking the King 4 boxes or the governance checklist within our organizations. And clearly we need to have a set of checks and balances as boards think about the governance models going forward. And we need to drive a culture of transparency within our organizations and make ourselves and hold ourselves accountable for our individual behaviors as board members. Now, all this is also emphasized in King 4, and I wouldn't repeat it, but I think King 4 says it pretty effectively when they say an organization must fundamentally add value to its stakeholders which includes clients, suppliers, employees, regulators, the environment, and indeed society at large. To add true value to stakeholders, an organization must have a long-term view and have a responsible business philosophy, taking care to create sustainable stakeholder value. The board assumes ultimate responsibility for driving the company's ethical standards and performance. We know that, and we take that responsibility strongly. And I guess you then should ask yourself the question, why do we have all those headlines on that first slide? This responsibility in most organizations is delegated to the executive management, because these are the people that are there virtually all the time. And we need to make sure that we hold our executive management accountable to driving the ethics statements, the ethics code of conduct, and driving accountability. And the boards should take this responsibility quite seriously in terms of holding the executives to the highest level of compliance. Now, moving on, I would say a key component of truly ethical culture is the ability of stakeholders to engage with corporates regarding their concerns. The ability to have that transparent and engagement and have it in a mutually respecting way. Ideally, internal and external mechanisms for reporting actual or suspected unethical or unlawful behaviors can be helpful for uplifting the transparency and integrity of the organization. But just reporting this is not good enough. We need to have that level of engagement. And what is clear, in my view, having gone through a lot of this stuff, we cannot rely on the regulators and lawmakers or the legislators to do this. We as business leaders need to think much more deeply around the consequences and come up with the ideas to fix the problems that are outcomes of these regulations and laws, and indeed the behaviors of our people. Our aim has to be the application of the highest standards of ethical decision making. In my role as chairman, in the governance model at Nedbank, of course profitability is important, but it is not profitability of Nedbank that keeps me awake at night. What keeps me awake at night is the confidence and the public trust that our deposit holders have in us as Nedbank, and our societal role as Nedbank in preserving the financial ecosystem of South Africa. That's what keeps me awake at night. We cannot take this trust and the burden of public trust that we have for granted, and we have to have ongoing vigilance if we need to make sure that this trust is embraced and enforced within Nedbank. And of course we do that through sound governance and good conduct, but more importantly, we need to do it in a way that ensures that there's accountability for people that behave in a way that's often referred to, I've exercised poor judgment, but that is just another word for unethical behavior. And we need to move away from excusing ourselves to saying this is just poor judgment, I made a mistake. It's really unethical behavior. Very quickly on state capture, we've seen that and you've seen all the headlines, and I'm not going to repeat all of this in the interest of time. And I think what's critical for us coming out of these inquiries, and of course we must have the inquiries, but what's critical for us is to make sure some action is taken and this whole thing just doesn't continue to drag itself out, or there's some level of accountability that comes out of all the state capture inquiries, the PIC inquiry, the SARS Commission, and all that stuff. And I don't want to leave this talk without specifically talking to the chartered accountants, being one myself. There's a lot of anxiety in the profession today. You know, is this profession doomed? As it's self-destructed? Having been a chartered accountant myself now for almost 40 years, more than 40 years, I would say it's a fantastic profession. It's a value-adding profession to society. We might have lost our way, but it is within our gift. It is within our gift to recreate that space and pedestal that the chartered accountants have had in society, and it is within our gift from the way we change our behaviors going forward as chartered accountants. And here there's a big message to the leaders of our profession, be they the Big Four, be they the Big Six, be they the chartered accountants that do all this creative thinking while they are in business. And ultimately, it's the auditors that come and get it, the sweepers that are the ones that are held accountable, but the people that created it. You know, the CEO of Steinhoff, he's a chartered accountant. The CEO of African Bank, he's a chartered accountant. We've seen the reporting of the VBS inquiry. I mean, as a chartered accountant, when you read that forensics report of 143 pages, you have to say, how can it be? There's disbelief. So I say there's still hope. I cherish the qualification I have, and I have no doubt in my mind that you as future leaders and future chartered accountants will bring this profession back to pride. And I have no doubt in my mind that even with the digitalization that's taking place, with the robotics that are being embraced by the banks and other businesses, there's going to be a bigger demand for chartered accountants, but we might find ourselves doing different things. So broaden your horizons, don't just stick to the accounting and auditing. Embrace the digitalization era that's coming. Embrace data analytics, and identify what the new capabilities and capacities are required, and what new jobs are going to be created in this digital economy. And if you do that, you'll be okay. And hopefully 40 years from now, one of you might be standing up and giving this lecture. So as future students, let me say to the students that are here from the University of Johannesburg, you should expect that your characters will be assessed as we work through these ethical dilemmas going forward. And not only should you have your characters assessed, you should assess the characters of the people you are working for and the people that you are working with, be they your clients, your suppliers, or your peers. There is no substitute for ethical characteristic. Being trustworthy makes you a good counterparty. And hence I want to say to you also again, ask this one question when you have an ethical dilemma. Can I do this? And the answer to that is normally quite easy. Yes, I can. Should I do this? And I hope some of the things I spoke to you about this afternoon will help you answer that question. So along with other business leaders, I'm certainly trying to use my position of influence, and I'm pushing certainly my institution as Nedbank to reshape its focus and how do we engage ourselves and make ourselves a better society. This includes the gatekeeping phase in deciding who will rise to the leadership of our business, but also what are the new systems that we need in order to judge and discipline the people in their careers going forward. The last thought I would like to leave you with is this. Being good at what you do may get you far in your career, but being a good citizen can do a lot more for you and your country in the long term. Now is the time for you to stand up and take responsibility for South Africa, and South Africa demands this of you as its citizen. So with that, I thank you for listening to me, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Nice.
stay
put
here.
up this last slide.
You
So
can
this is what I think, and you can put any date to that, 2025 or 2030, and I believe South Africa can still claim its rightful position that we had in the global world in the 1996s and 95s when we had the Madiba magic. The good times in South Africa, in my view, is yet to come, and I've tried to articulate some of the headlines that I would like to see in 2025 or 2030. If you listen to the budget speech today, you might think that I might have had a few drags of the green thing before I came here, but I didn't. Okay, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Prof. Vassi, for that very insightful discussion, and I think it's raising a lot of questions. I'm like so buzzing here with a whole lot of issues in my mind. So while you gather your thought, I'm going to kick off a first question to you. You spoke about, Vassi, about statutory regulation in your talk, and I look at South Africa and I think we've got probably the world's best regulation when it comes to things like don't audit an account, Section 90. There's things like MAFA. Now we just introduced the mandatory firm rotation as well. And then we also got things like NOCLA. So sounds like an Afrikaans word. I think it's made from New York, isn't it? It comes out from New York. So non-compliance with laws and regulations. But you also touched on it that we don't hold people accountable. So yes, we got some strong regulation. I guess my question is, how did it go wrong? How did all this, how did we find ourselves here?
Actually, that's a very good question, and that's where the kind of anger and when you think about how did we get to where we got to, I completely agree with you. I think we have enough laws, probably too many. We have cutting edge regulation, but I think the problem that has got to where got us to where we've got to has been a lack of leadership, lack of this authentic, deep, ethical leadership, and I think we probably lost our way, it does come down to leadership, in my view. So, how did, just take the auditing and accounting profession, having owned the space for 7 years, right? How did we allow ourselves to become number 30? It comes down to leadership. Now, and I don't want to mention names, when that audit firm chose to do the SARS audit, did the leadership actually ask that question? Can I do this? Of course, you've got a forensics capability, you can do it. But should I do it? And what was the purpose of what I was trying to do it? And that's what I think has been lost. We lost our way. And it is within our gift to rethink and kind of try to get the leadership back in what we're doing.
It's interesting. I facilitated the tax in Daba a few weeks ago, and on the panel, I asked the very same question to the panel. Is that how long would it take for SARS to come right? Because we know where SARS is. We know SARS was number one as well, one of the top collectors in the world as well. And I asked the panel, so how long before we turn the corner and come back to the old SARS? And the response, funny enough, was 8 years. So it matches quite nicely with the 2025. It's sort of in the region that we can turn the corner, we can come right. And they also spoke about 8 year turning the corner. It will take about 8 years to come back and fix where we've come from. They also mentioned, to break an institution is so easy. It took a matter of a few months, to be honest, to break it from all the hard work where it once got built up to. But to destroy it is very easy.
Overnight.
Just overnight it happens, and I think we kind of find ourselves there. Questions? I'm going to open questions to the floor. I'm sure you've got questions that you're thinking about.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Good evening. My name is Gwen Amusi. For the record, I'm 21 actually. I'm with my colleague here, We are hoping that we'll actually make them next year.
Good.
So I have two quick questions actually. One is a matter of duress. Being 21 years old now, going into the corporate world, imagine if hypothetically I was to be Z's PA next year. You would appreciate that there would be significant amounts of duress on me if she was to say, do this for me, do that. What would you say to your 21-year-old self? Just say those words that will encourage that young person to stand up and be able to have the courage to say, no, even though this is like the beginning of our careers, even though there's so much that is riding on this decision. So that is the first question. The second question is when we find people to be doing wrong in corporate, we shun them, we kick them out of our organizations. But my question is now, where do we kick them to? Where do these people go? Because if you are fined 2 million for doing a particular transaction that was inappropriate, yes, that was wrong, but you're fined and you probably could afford to pay that 2 million. And your life continues. And you probably could seal that agreement. So society can even never hear about that particular doing. How would you then say that we need to maybe rethink how this punishment of wrongdoing should be done? Should we maybe not even punish people? Should we try and rehabilitate them? If I could go to that extent.
Two very important points. Let me deal with the first one. The first one, I would say, to a large extent, you've answered it yourself. But I would say stick to your values. Think about this question, can I do this and should I do this? Of course, the answer to can I will always be yes. But should I do this is where you stick to your values. And the word that you used is you should have the courage to speak up. And invariably, organizations that I've worked with and work for do have an environment where you can speak up. You know, they do have this call centers. You can report things anonymously, and I can tell you they do get investigated. So an organization has to be really, really rotten if somebody speaks up and action is not taken, right? So courage and stick to your values. I think that the second question is a little bit more complex and requires a lot of introspection. And I'll use the example which is in the public, two examples in the public domain. The CEO of Able and the CEO of Steinhoff. These guys are not in jail yet. They haven't had a fine yet. They have tied themselves up with lawyers, right? They walk around coffee shops in Omanus and wherever they live like nothing's happened. And the guys that are sweating are the auditors and the audit partners. And the regulators are stressing. The asset managers are stressing because they took their client monies and put into these companies and they've lost it. So I think that there has to be a complete rethink around accountability, firstly. The second thing I think we need to come up with is naming and shaming, right? And I think the third thing, having lived through an oppressed government for 40 years, I'm a strong believer in rehabilitation. But there has to be a level of acceptance of accountability and rehabilitation after that. You know, so I think that entire process has to be rethought. The other one I would put out, and I know this is being streamed, so maybe it'll be covered somewhere, and I'm happy to engage. This notion of audit partners doing something wrong and being found guilty by IRBA and admitting to a fine of 250,000 Rand per incident, confidential agreement done, and you carry on. I can't see that as an option. I don't see that as an option going forward.
say that in relation with the government and the banks, what is it that banks can try and initiate as an organization to try and help the youth who are business-minded and yet educational-wise, from an academic perspective, they're not so wise, but to say that they are street smart and book smart in a sense that it totals up to the whole idea of how they can run a business or an entity or enterprise, for example, in such ways that the connection between the government and the banks, is there anything that they're trying to initiate so that they can help them? Besides, if you may try to respond with NYDA and things like that, but from the grassroots level where we go out to the communities, pause a little bit, and try and figure out and find out those potential type of individuals who have such a mindset, because that is one of the things that we are founded. We are disadvantaged. We're listening to auditors and reporters, things that are far beyond our levels. Whereas if we were to start at the ground level, what is it that we might be helped with? So to say that if we then get there, is it true enough of those who have never been there as of those who've been there already? So to say that they're as corrupt as them, because those on top seem to be shaming those down there who already have nothing in terms of inequality, poverty, and unemployment.
Okay.
That's my question, sir.
Very good point. I think the point you make is gets more complicated if you look at the concentration of the South African economy, where we are driven largely by big enterprise, and we have a culture of corporatization. And I think going forward, one of the things that are going to happen is the rebalancing of the South African economy in terms of how do we drive a more entrepreneurship kind of culture, how the banks embrace this in terms of the way we lend money, how we take risk, and is on the one side, versus how do we drive this culture of entrepreneurship that goes into the van and the man culture, because the South African economy is not wired up to embrace this. And that's part of what this 1.5 billion fund was seeking to do. There has to be a culture, a shift. There has to be more localization of businesses. We have to embrace the rural communities more, that becomes self-serving to the communities that they work with. And I think we need to move away from the old BEE thing, which has become an enablement, an entitlement thing, to creating emerging entrepreneurs that are going to become the small businesses of the future that are going to generate work. And the points that you make is we in the banks, together with government, have to create product that caters for this. Because if you walk into a bank today and say you want to set up a plumbing business, the first thing they're going to ask you is, where's your 3-year business plan? I don't know if how many of you tried to register a business. Apparently it takes you something like eight months before you get VAT registered, get a license to operate, and all that kind of stuff. So we need to streamline a hell of a lot of that stuff as we go forward. And I'm hoping that's going to be part of what comes out in this investment conference, and as we shape the rebalancing of the South African economy going forward. And I think far too often we have a culture of you've got to go to university and then you've got to go and work for a corporate. But I think we need to change that rhetoric, and it's okay to go and run a business and make sure that finance can be provided for individuals to do this. Z?
Mr. Chair, I stand to be corrected. I think Nedbank's favor. In certain of our retail branches, we do have something called innovation hubs. And that's where we invite small businesses to come into the branch to utilize its facilities to do exactly that. Speak to experts on how to build a plan. They even facilitate sessions where they can host networking sessions where they can meet other entrepreneurs to build their networks. It's not in all retail branches, and I suppose it's calculated to certain regions. But I think we're proud from a Nedbank perspective to be in that space of play, where we even provide them facilities of using our conference centers for video calls, or making telephone calls to phone suppliers, using our computers to draft or keep their accounting records. So I think that is one thing that we are doing within our retail and business bank, small business banking sphere, from a Nedbank perspective.
Good point. But I have to say, it's quite intimidating to walk into Nedbank. And I think that's exactly where he was coming.
We've tried to make it funky now.
Actually, any bank.
Any bank.
Question at the back.
Hi everybody, sorry I was late. I was debating whether to disclose where I'm from, but I am from KPMG and I'm driving citizenship and public interest there. And thank you for the chats. And a lot of what you're talking about as an organization, obviously, it's real life for us at the moment. And the two key things that I haven't had us discuss is there is a trend line on the incidents that have happened, and that trend line is connected to the state, and that's our operating context in South Africa. And the reality of it, in my mind, is you spoke about erosion of leadership, and it cascades at all levels of society. And business can't operate in societies that fail, and I think we've got a societal issue which business is operating in. And my concern is, from an accountability point of view, leaders are failures. And therefore, the only solution I see really is back to grassroots, is grassroots activation and some level of accountability coming from the ground up, including in the institutions we've created. And yes, there are speak-up opportunities, but there's then threats to personal life. There's all these dilemmas. But what my key question is, how do we get men on the streets to actually have a voice and find their voice so that we can strengthen the state and strengthen the institutions that we've created? That's one key component, and I think that for me it's the only saving grace that we have. Second part is, I do think as a profession there's a conversation we're not willing to open up to, which in my mind is, I think the profession has got an existential crisis, in a sense that from our perspectives, clients push us down in fees. Risk is going up from a socio-political, technical risk. Demands on wages is high. Technology advances are high. We can't keep up. And back to what your CEO comment now, the complexities of what's created in organizations is getting more and more complex. And the business model just cannot simply catch up. And the standards are expecting you to perform at a level lower than what your clients are prepared to pay you for. No one is closing the public trust expectation. And my concern is there a role for perhaps all of this to move to internal assurance, and we really relook at the ability of the organization to self-correct, because I think auditors have got no chance.
Yeah. Thank you for declaring that you're from KPMG. And let me say up front, I've spent a lot of my last 2 years making sure that we have 4 firms in South Africa. And I believe having KPMG survive in this country and flourish in this country is in South Africa's interest. I want to say that up front, and I like to think that I did my fair share in challenging them as they are dealing with all of this stuff. I think I've spoken enough on the leadership issue. We've got to where we've got to largely because of the leadership crisis within government, no question about it. The systematic destruction of institutions that caused the onslaught of state capture within South Africa. But we can't blame it on the state, because for every corrupt every act of corruption, there's a corrupter and a corruptee. And so often we tend to focus on the corrupter, which is the large multinationals, right? Not the corruptee. So I don't buy the debate fully that it all lies at the doorstep of the state. Clearly, there was a key driver of it, in my humble opinion. But I do think that we have to look at ourselves and ask that key question. Should I do this? Right? And I think the answer does not lie in moving the assurance to internal audit. I think that's a very dangerous route to go down, because internal audit is not a very sexy place to be in. And the auditing profession, if you go back to its history, used to largely be government-run organizations. And they never used to attract the talent that they attract today. So I think that the profession should refine itself and work hard at refining itself and regain this public trust. And I believe it is within the capacity of the firms to do that, and the profession. And they need to do that in a collective manner, because what's happened to KPMG is not a KPMG problem. It's a professional problem. And I think if we think more as a collective, whether you are in private practice, whether you're a chartered accountant, as a CFO, asking yourselves the same question, and how do we take collective responsibility to regain the trust and the standing of chartered accountants is where it has to be. And a lot of this stuff goes to what you've said. You know, when the chartered accountants dream up these creative accounting stuff that they do, where is a discipline that says, should I be doing this? And I think that's where we've got to get to. And the regulator has a key role to play. And the regulator, it's in the regulator's interest to have a strong profession. So this notion of the regulator trying to, behave in a manner that goes to the 21st birthday party of his son and talks about all the wrong things that he's done instead of reflecting on the good things that this 21-year-old did. And I think there has to be a tunadering of the regulator as well to the accounting profession. The tunadering is the right word. Ben?
Yep.
Come together.
You spoke of consequences, and this also touches on that. We've got a Nugent Commission of Inquiry, we've got the state capture. Do you believe we're going to get action? Are we going to hold people accountable? In your mind, because we've got to turn the corner at some stage, and I think, without dealing with the issues that we face as a country at the moment, we can talk of leadership, we can talk of, people standing up, the new CEOs leading. I think there's two issues as well. The one is the business sector, and then again is the government sector as well. So we need it also, that has to happen on both levels for us to go to 2025 and to fix it.
Yeah. So, I believe that we would not achieve this if we didn't have these inquiries. And this is almost like a truth and reconciliation of the corruption and all that stuff that's going on. So I see that as an integral part. However, I think the President, as a matter of urgency, needs to rebuild the National Prosecuting Authority, and so that proper investigations can be conducted and we stick to the rule of the law. We don't become kangaroo courts, and we apply the rule of the law, which is enshrined in our Constitution, and people are held accountable, and I believe that will happen. We just have to be a little bit patient. I mean, if you didn't have this inquiry, the Nugent inquiry, Bain wouldn't have come up. And Bain is a global organization, right? You look at McKinsey, you look at SAP. Now, we haven't even had an inquiry completed on Transnet. All that's happened at the moment is on the Eskom stuff that's been going on. And now we know that the CEO of Transnet wants to hold the directors of Transnet into contempt because they fired him. So I think there will be accountability. We just need to be patient. And I don't believe time is running out because we are South Africans. We have this spirit to succeed. And I'm very positive that we will get to these headlines.
Any final questions? Prepare to take one more, and Vassi is going to take some questions. If not, I'll try to surmise what the discussions were. So I think we've got strong regulation, we've got weak implementation. It seems like we need to fix. We need to hold people accountable as well. Vassi spoke about training as a solution. We as academics, we have a big responsibility on our heads to make sure that the pipeline that's going out has ethics at their core and at the back of them all the time. You spoke about back to basics, getting things right. I think we've got to take it easy and slow, one day at a time, and fix things. And I think this is most important, is that we need people like yourself, we need leaders to come out and talk against it and to be bold enough to say that we're going to take the corner, we're going to ingrain ethics into everything that we do going forward. So I think that's the issues I get, and obviously we've now got a date from you, so we're going to we as accountants like numbers, so we're counting down to the 2025, and I think it's something, like you say, it's very doable and achievable, and we want to get back. We want to reclaim our #1 auditing spot again. We want SARS at the all-time best again. It's in the best interest of our country. I always say, when we look at the numbers on the budget deficit side, we don't want to give the youth of the country a financial statement of the country which is negative. It's nobody wants a company that is almost giving them a technical insolvent company to run and say good luck. That's not fair on them to succeed as well. So I think we all have a vested interest in fixing this and going forward. Vassi, thank you. I want to call Ben Marks, who is the head of the School of Accounting, which is the official thanks.
Thanks, Peter. I want to thank everybody for coming. People who see in person, you are our friends, you are our students, you've been our ex-students. So it's so great to see you, to be here tonight. The guys who are writing still tomorrow, CTA, all of the best. Nothing as good relaxation as listening to Naidoo here, but to all our friends, everybody's streaming in. I know our director of school is streaming in from New York, so from all over the world. But thanks for everybody who's coming here. And I can assure you, at this university we built ethical leaders who will, I must correct you, not in 40 years be the chairman of Nedbank, but maybe in 20 years, in 10 years. And then we're proud of that. So thanks for everybody who came, and thanks for all our friends and everybody. You spoke about just something. We've got our dean here who's so supportive of us, and thank you for that, Prof. Daniel. You spoke about entrepreneurship. You must talk to the dean over something to eat here, because he's got an initiative going that will amaze you, where he's going back to building entrepreneurship from grassroots level and together with a degree and everything. So it's happening. It's exciting stuff happening here. So for everybody in the audience, thank you very much for those streaming. And then
in less than 5 years.
In less than 5 years, yes. So please have a discussion. It's amazing stuff we don't always know about. And I think, so it's happening, and I always say it's coming from the bottom, but leadership from the top as well. And then it's my great pleasure just to thank Prof Naidoo, Prof Vassi Naidoo. I know him, like you said, for 30 years, and we still we just look, we look old, but we're very young. I mean, we're actually 40 years old, so we know each other from. But Vassi, it's such a privilege knowing you, and I think you would realize just by him talking, I mean, he's a humble man. You know, he speaks to presidents and world leaders, and he comes to us and he talks to us. And I think I want on his behalf, invite you, go and shake his hand and talk to him. That's that kind of man he is. He can talk to presidents, but he can talk to us. And his time is not too valuable to come and talk to us tonight. And we really appreciate that. We are fortunate to have you as a professor of practice and to draw from your wisdom, but also to draw from your humbleness and your modesty and come and share your vision and your drive with us. I can also tell you, Vassi can make things work. I mean, if he says something must work, it will work. I was once, well, in 2002, I remember I sat in his office in Deloitte and he said, Psyche must do this. And he picked up the phone and he phoned Ignatius. And a week later, we and a colleague were in Australia and the UK and doing a comparison. So I think, talk to him and see how things work. But we're very, very thankful, Vassi, for coming tonight and talk to us. We look forward to you sharing this with us next year. And be sure it's not just us in the room that's hearing you. And we do thank you. There's nothing we can actually give you that you most probably don't have, being the chairman of Nedbank. I just want to ask Andre here. But there's, and I must just show you, and people will know there's a pair of socks in there. Yeah, I should actually show you, but it's quite funky. It says accountants aren't boring. So, yeah, I mean, that is true. So it's not the size of the gift, it's the gesture. And it looks like that, and exactly. And next year when you come, Prof Naidoo, wear them with pride. And just lastly, I just want to say thank you very much for Andre and in the absence, Jermaine, of making this work. We're a real audience here, but this audience is much, much, much bigger in the world that's hearing the message. So for everybody, thank you very much. And please, thank you, Meneer, for such a, you can see, you can watch him on most probably tomorrow on TV talking about a medium-term budget. But thanks for organizing it so professionally and mastering it so professionally. And please have some Heineken mineral waters and orange juices. The students will know what we mean. Have some snacks with us, and let's enjoy it. Thank you for everybody. Thanks.